The smell of him hit her first, pine and leather, and something wild that made her blood hum beneath her skin. Aria Vale hadn't dared raise her eyes, not once in all her 20 years of service within these palace walls. Never look the alphas in the eye. That was the first rule. The only rule that truly mattered. And yet now, sprawled gracelessly across the polished marble floor with hundreds of eyes burning into her back, she found herself face to face with the most dangerous creature in the kingdom. Alpha King Kalen Thorne. She'd always imagined him as some great, terrible beast, a monster conjured from nightmares to keep the servants in line. But monsters weren't supposed to have eyes like his. Deep blue, like midnight waters, cold and ancient and knowing. They bored into hers with an intensity that stole her breath. His nostrils flared slightly as he inhaled, and something flickered across his face. Recognition, confusion, hunger? Despite her terror, despite the crushing weight of palace protocol and the knowledge that her life hung in the balance, Aria couldn't look away. She was caught, suspended in that gaze, like a rabbit before a wolf. And then it happened. What followed was the single most terrifying moment of Aria's life. The Alpha King, untouched, unmated, ruler of all 12 high packs, dropped to his knees beside her fallen form. The entire court gasped collectively, a single shocked intake of breath that echoed through the vaulted chamber. Before she could move, before she could even process what was happening, his hand shot out, gripping her wrist with impossible gentleness. "Mine," he growled, the word rumbling from deep in his chest. Just like that, his teeth were at her neck, pressing into the tender flesh with enough pressure to mark but not break skin. The bond exploded between them, hot and electric and terrifying. Aria felt it clear as day, the ancient magic sealing them together, binding her to him in ways she couldn't begin to comprehend. Her world tilted. The room spun. Darkness crept at the edges of her vision. By the time the Alpha King pulled back, his eyes were glowing that eerie amber gold of a shifted wolf. With every heartbeat, the mark on her neck throbbed, sending waves of heat through her trembling body. The air thickened as whispers erupted around them, shock and outrage building like a storm. What has he done? A servant? Is he mad? The king has marked an omega. Truth be told, Aria didn't register most of it. Her thoughts spun in frantic circles as she tried to make sense of what just happened. She'd been carrying a silver tray of ceremonial wine, walking with the practiced invisibility of all palace servants, when she'd tripped on what she couldn't even recall now and crashed at the king's feet, spilling dark red liquid across the pristine white marble like blood. She had expected punishment. Execution, even. Not this. Never this. In the span of a breath, her life had shattered and reformed into something unrecognizable. As the silence stretched, the king rose to his feet, pulling her up with him. Her legs shook so badly she would have collapsed again if not for his iron grip on her arm. Under the weight of his stare, she finally remembered herself and lowered her gaze, though it was far too late for such deference now. "Your Majesty," High Alpha Varek stepped forward, his voice carefully controlled. "Perhaps we should discuss this development in private." But then Kalen's grip tightened ever so slightly on her arm. "There is nothing to discuss." His voice was deep, commanding, the voice of a ruler who had never been questioned. "She is not your servant. She is my mate. And she wears my mark now." Her chest ached as these impossible words reverberated through the hall. The nobles looked on with varying expressions of horror and fascination. Meanwhile, Aria's pulse raced so frantically she feared her heart might burst. This couldn't be happening. Omegas like her weren't chosen. They weren't seen. They were shadows, passing unnoticed through the halls of power. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't understand why the most powerful alpha in the realm would choose her, a nameless, faceless servant girl who'd never even shifted into her wolf form. As the bond pulsed between them, strange and foreign and frightening, Aria found herself stealing glances at the king's face. His jaw was clenched tight, the muscles there twitching slightly as if he fought some inner battle. Yet his eyes never left her, tracking her every minute movement with predatory focus. What's worse, the nobles were beginning to recover from their shock, their expressions hardening into something calculating and cold. With every step he took around her, positioning himself between her and the crowd, Aria felt the tension building. The king was creating a barrier with his own body, protecting her from the hostile stares, or perhaps preventing her escape. "This is unprecedented," Lady Callista finally announced, her voice sharp as a blade. "A royal mate must be of noble blood. The law is clear." Before either could speak, Kaelin's head whipped toward the woman, a snarl curling his lips. "The law is what I say it is." That was the moment Aria realized the true gravity of what had happened. The Alpha King hadn't just marked her, he had upset the entire balance of power. And between them, something cracked, the fragile shell of her former life splitting open to reveal something new and terrifying. Soon after, she found herself being led away by two stone-faced royal guards, the king's voice fading behind her as he addressed the stunned courtiers. Despite that, she could still feel him through the newly formed bond, a constant awareness of his presence, his attention still fixed on her even as he dealt with the chaos she had unwittingly caused. More importantly, she could feel something else through the bond, a desperation that mirrored her own bewilderment, as if he too had been caught off guard by his actions. As if the mark had been as much a surprise to him as it was to her. On the other hand, perhaps this was some elaborate test or game, the kind of cruel entertainment that alphas sometimes enjoyed at the expense of lower ranks. But her wolf, the wolf she had never fully connected with, stirred within her for the first time, recognizing something in the king that Aria herself could not yet see. As the guards escorted her through the servants' passageways and up unfamiliar staircases, Aria caught glimpses of shocked faces peering from doorways and alcoves. Word traveled fast in the palace. By the time they reached a set of ornate double doors inlaid with silver crescents, the royal emblem, every servant in the palace likely knew of her impossible fate. The doors swung open to reveal chambers more luxurious than anything Aria had ever seen. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating rich tapestries and furniture carved from rare woods. The space was larger than the entire servants' dormitory where she had spent her life. Without warning, one of the guards spoke. "These are the royal mate's chambers. You will await the king here." The moment their eyes locked on hers, Aria saw it, not the usual contempt reserved for servants, but something new, uncertainty, wariness, maybe even fear, as if they no longer knew what she was or how to treat her. With his scent in the air, that intoxicating mix of pine and leather and power, Aria felt dizzy all over again. The guards departed, leaving her alone in oppressive silence. She stood frozen in the center of the room, afraid to touch anything, afraid to move, afraid to believe any of this was real. As her wolf stirred again within her chest, stronger this time, pushing against the cage of her ribs as if seeking freedom for the first time, Aria whispered the question that echoed through her entire being, "Why me?" Between one breath and the next, She sensed his approach before she heard it. Heavy footsteps in the corridor outside, the electric awareness of his presence growing stronger. Her breath caught as the doors swung open. Alpha King Kalen Thorne stood silhouetted against the light, his massive frame filling the doorway, those midnight blue eyes finding hers instantly. A beat later, he stepped inside and closed the doors behind him with a soft click that somehow sounded like finality. "I've waited too long," he said, his voice softer than she had expected, almost gentle despite the raw power it contained. "And now that I've found you, I won't let you go." As the echo faded, Aria realized with absolute certainty that her life, as she had known it, was over. In its place stood something new and terrifying and utterly unknown. Beneath the moonlight filtering through the tall windows, she waited for whatever would come next, the mark on her neck burning like a brand. They say a wolf's bite changes everything. They don't tell you that when an alpha king's teeth sink into your flesh. It's not just your life that changes, it's your soul. Aria's hand trembled as she traced the mark on her neck, the raised edges still warm to the touch. The bond pulsed between them like a second heartbeat, unfamiliar and frightening. She could feel him even now, his presence in her mind like a shadow, his emotions bleeding into hers, confusion, determination, hunger. Alpha King Kalen Thorne stood before her, impossibly tall, impossibly powerful, studying her face with those midnight eyes that seemed to see straight through to her bones. She'd been trained never to meet an alpha's gaze, and yet now she couldn't look away. "You're afraid," he said finally, his deep voice filling the opulent chamber. It wasn't a question. Aria swallowed hard. The truth bubbled up her throat before she could stop it. "Yes." Without thinking, she backed away until the edge of an ornate sofa pressed against her legs. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, she realized with startling clarity that no servant had ever been alone with the king like this. No Omega had ever worn his mark. What did he want from her? "I won't hurt you," Kalen said, the words incongruous coming from the most feared alpha in the 12 high packs. He remained where he stood, making no move to approach her, as if he understood that his very presence threatened to overwhelm her senses. More importantly, he seemed to be struggling with something himself, his jaw clenched tight, hands flexing at his sides as if fighting the urge to reach for her. The space between them burned with unspoken questions. As the silence roared between them, Aria finally found her voice. "Why me?" The words came out barely above a whisper, but in the quiet room, they might as well have been a shout. Something flashed in those deep blue eyes, surprise, perhaps, that she would dare question him directly. And, just like that, everything changed again. His expression softened almost imperceptibly, the hard lines of his face easing. "Because you are mine," he said simply. "You have always been mine." Her thoughts spun at the impossibility of his claim. Until yesterday, the Alpha King hadn't known she existed. She was nothing, a shadow, a servant, trained to fade into the background. Yet here he stood, looking at her as if she were something precious, something he'd been searching for. Without warning, a knock sounded at the door. Kalen's head snapped toward the sound, a low growl rising in his throat that made the hair on Aria's arms stand on end. Between them, the bond flared hot and protective. "Enter," he commanded, the words sharp enough to cut. High Alpha Varek strode into the room, his silver-streaked hair pulled back severely from his angular face. His eyes flicked dismissively over Aria before settling on the king. As though fate demanded it, 2 more council members followed, Lady Callista and Lord Darius, their expressions carefully neutral, though Aria could smell their disapproval thick in the air. Your Majesty, Varek began, his tone falsely deferential. The council requests your presence. There are matters that require immediate attention. Under the weight of Varek's stare, Aria felt herself shrinking, old habits reasserting themselves as she lowered her gaze to the floor. Yet somehow, through the bond, she felt a surge of something. Not quite anger, but resolve emanating from the king. Speak plainly, Varek, Kaelin said, his voice dangerously soft. If you have concerns, voice them now. Lady Callista stepped forward, her jeweled fingers clasped tightly before her. Your Majesty, with all respect, this, she gestured vaguely toward Aria, situation presents complications. The mark must be removed. The moment their eyes locked, Aria saw the naked contempt in Lady Callista's gaze. It burned worse than the mark on her neck ever could. But what made her breath catch was the sudden wave of pure, undiluted rage that crashed through the bond from Kaelin. Without another word, he moved to stand between Aria and the council members, his body a shield, a barrier. Her instincts surged at the protective gesture, her wolf, so long dormant, pressing forward against her consciousness. The mark stays. Each word fell like stone. She stays. Lord Darius cleared his throat nervously. Your Majesty, surely you understand the implications. A royal mate must be. I know precisely what she is, Kaelin interrupted, his voice like thunder. The tension broke as his power filled the room, and Alpha's dominance pressing down until even High Alpha Varek took an involuntary step back. With every step he took toward them, the council members retreated until they stood crowded near the doorway. The council exists to advise, not to command. Remember your place. As the wind shifted in the wake of his movement, Aria caught the scent of the council's fear, sharp and acrid. In that moment, she understood why Kaelin Thorne was king. It wasn't just his lineage or strength, but the sheer force of his will that bent others to his command. Varek recovered first, straightening his spine with visible effort. We serve only the kingdom's best interests, Your Majesty. And this, attachment, threatens stability. In the quiet that followed, her heart skipped as Kaelin turned to look at her over his shoulder, something unfathomable in his expression. The air thickened with tension as they all awaited his response. Leave us, he ordered finally, turning back to the council. I will speak to her alone. The council members exchanged glances, but knew better than to protest. As they withdrew, Aria caught Lady Callista's parting glance, cold, calculating, promising that this wasn't over. The moment the door closed, Kaelin's shoulders relaxed marginally. With his scent in the air, wild and compelling, Aria found it difficult to think clearly. Her voice trembled when she finally spoke. They want me gone. Between one breath and the next, he was before her, not touching but close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. What they want is irrelevant. Meanwhile, Aria's mind raced with the implications of what was happening. She didn't understand the politics, the power plays, but even she could recognize the dangerous position she now occupied. Deep down, she knew the truth. She was a liability to him, a weakness his enemies would exploit. I don't know how to be what they expect, she admitted, the words spilling out before she could stop them. I'm just a servant. I've never even, she stopped, embarrassed by what she'd almost revealed. A growl rose in his throat, but not one of anger. You've never what? He pressed, his gaze intent on her face. Her world tilted as she forced herself to meet his eyes. I've never shifted into my wolf. Surprise flickered across his features, replaced quickly by something that looked almost like pain. How is that possible? The question hung between them, sharp-edged and dangerous. Omegas were the weakest, the lowest in the pack hierarchy. Many struggled to shift at all without an alpha's guidance. And she had been separated from pack bonds her entire life, raised in isolation among other servants, trained to suppress her wolf nature rather than embrace it. As though the forest watched their exchange, the room fell silent save for their breathing. His eyes never left her face as understanding dawned. "They've kept you from your nature," he said finally, the words rough with barely contained fury. "They've denied you your birthright." Before she could respond, the doors burst open again, this time admitting a young woman with the same midnight blue eyes as Kaelin. She paused at the threshold, taking in the scene before her, Aria standing uncertainly in servant's clothing in the center of the royal chambers, the king looming over her with unmistakable possessiveness. "So it's true," the woman said, her voice melodic despite her obvious shock. "You've chosen a mate." Kaelin didn't turn away from Aria. "Maya," he acknowledged. "This is Aria Vale, my marked mate." As the name hung in the air, Aria realized this must be the king's sister, Princess Maya, rumored to be the only person in the kingdom who could speak to him freely without fear of repercussion. Maya approached slowly, studying Aria with undisguised curiosity. Unlike the council members, there was no disgust in her gaze, only honest surprise and something else concern, perhaps. "Brother," she said softly, "what have you done?" While her pulse raced with anxiety, Aria watched the silent communication that passed between the siblings, a raised eyebrow, a slight tilt of the head. They were so similar, yet where Kaelin was all hard edges and tightly leashed power, Maya moved with fluid grace. The princess circled Aria once, then smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her face. "Well," she announced, "this changes everything." As shadow danced between them, Aria felt a strange shift inside her, not fear anymore, but something suspiciously like hope. Maya's acceptance seemed to ease some invisible burden from Kaelin's shoulders, his posture relaxing slightly. What followed was completely unexpected. The princess took Aria's hands in hers, the gesture so startling that Aria nearly pulled away. "Come with me," Maya said. "You can't meet the nobles looking like a kitchen maid. We need to make you look like what you are now, the future queen." Her name hung in the air as Aria tried to process these words. Future queen? The title felt impossible, foreign, like clothing several sizes too large. As the mark tingled on her neck, Aria cast one last look at Kaelin. His expression had softened into something almost tender, though his eyes still burned with that strange hunger. "Go with her," he said. "I'll come for you tonight." The promise in those words sent a shiver down her spine that wasn't entirely fear. As she followed Maya from the room, Aria wondered what exactly she was walking into and whether she would ever find her way back to the simple life she'd known before. Have you ever felt the weight of 1,000 eyes judging your every move? For Aria Vale, it wasn't just eyes watching her now. It was claws waiting to tear her down, fangs eager to rip her throat out. 3 days had passed since the Alpha King had marked her, and with each passing hour, the whispers grew louder, the threats less veiled. Tonight's banquet would be her first official appearance as the king's marked mate, and already she could taste the hostility in the air, thick as blood. She stood motionless as Princess Maya's handmaidens worked around her, transforming her from servant to royalty with deft hands and expensive fabrics. The woman in the mirror wore a gown of midnight blue, the royal color, embroidered with silver crescents that caught the light with every breath. Her dark hair was swept up to deliberately display the mark on her neck, a declaration, Maya had explained, not a suggestion. Don't fidget, the princess commanded gently, adjusting the drape of the silk across Aria's shoulders. Remember what I told you. Over the past 3 days, Maya had crammed Aria's head with protocols and politics until it threatened to split open. Truth be told, she'd retained perhaps half of it. The names of noble houses, packed territories, ancient alliances, they blurred together in a dizzying tangle. Without thinking, Aria's fingers drifted to the mark on her neck, tracing its edges with a familiarity that still startled her. What scared her more than the noble's hatred was how quickly she was adapting to this new life, as if some part of her had always been waiting for it. Despite that, her stomach churned with anxiety. What if I fail him? She whispered, voicing the fear that had haunted her since that first moment in the throne room. Maya's reflection appeared beside hers in the mirror, their eyes meeting. My brother doesn't make mistakes, she said simply. If he chose you, there's a reason. But then a shadow passed over the princess's face, something Aria couldn't quite interpret. Before she could question it, a knock at the door made both women turn. As if summoned by their conversation, Alpha King Kaelin Thorne entered the chamber, his massive frame filling the doorway. The handmaidens immediately bowed and retreated to the corners of the room. Under the weight of his stare, Aria felt her pulse quicken, the bond between them humming with awareness. His eyes traveled over her slowly, drinking in the transformation. When his gaze finally met hers, the intensity there stole her breath. Leave us, he commanded, never looking away from Aria. Maya squeezed her hand briefly before departing with the handmaidens, the door closing with a soft click behind them. The air thickened in their absence, charged with unspoken words. What followed was a silence so complete Aria could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. Kaelin circled her slowly, like a predator assessing its prey. Only she wasn't prey, was she? She was his mate, marked, claimed, but still uncertain of her place in his world. You look, he began, his deep voice sending shivers across her skin. He seemed to struggle for the right word, which surprised her. The Alpha King was never at a loss. Instead of finishing his thought, he reached out, his fingers hovering just above the mark on her neck without touching her. Through the bond, she felt a surge of possessive pride that made her cheeks flush. The nobles will test you tonight, he said finally, his tone hardening. They will look for any sign of weakness. Aria swallowed. I know. His eyebrow arched slightly, as if surprised by her calm response. In the echo of his voice, she found unexpected strength. Maybe it was the bond, or maybe it was simply 3 days of Maya's relentless training, but Aria felt less afraid than she had before. With every heartbeat, she became more aware of him, not just his physical presence, but his emotions bleeding through their connection. Beneath his controlled exterior, Kaelin was worried. About her? About the consequences of his choice? I won't embarrass you, she promised softly. Something flashed in his eyes, not anger, but frustration. That's not, he stopped, collecting himself. That's not what concerns me. Without warning, he closed the distance between them, his hand finally making contact with the mark on her neck. The touch sent fire racing through her veins, her wolf stirring restlessly beneath her skin. They will try to convince you that you don't belong at my side, he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous rumble. That I made a mistake. Before she could respond, a commotion in the hallway broke the moment. The doors burst open as Lord Darius entered without announcement, his face flushed with barely contained rage. The interruption was a deliberate breach of protocol, one that would have cost anyone else their life. Your Majesty, he spat, bowing stiffly. The Lunar Council demands your immediate attention. Kalen's hand dropped from Aria's neck, his expression shifting to the cold mask of kingship. The Lunar Council does not demand anything of me, Darius. Lord Darius's eyes flicked dismissively over Aria before returning to the king. A delegation from the Eastern Pax has arrived early. Alpha Magnus brings his daughter. As the words hung in the air, understanding dawned on Aria like ice water down her spine. This wasn't a coincidental visit. Alpha Magnus had brought his daughter, presumably as a potential mate for Kalen, only to discover the position already filled by a former servant. In the stillness that followed, Aria's thoughts spun wildly. Was this why the mark had happened so suddenly? Had Kalen known about this arrangement? Was she some kind of political shield? On the other hand, the timing seemed too perfect to be coincidence. As if sensing her thoughts, Kalen's jaw tightened. Without looking at her, he addressed Lord Darius. Inform them I will greet them at the banquet, as planned. Lord Darius remained rooted in place, his scent sour with disapproval. Alpha Magnus was promised consideration of a union between our houses. The Alpha daughter was led to believe. I made no such promises, Kalen interrupted, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. The Lunar Council did, Lord Darius countered, boldly meeting the king's gaze. Arrangements were being finalized when you complicated matters. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Leave us, Kalen commanded, his alpha power filling the space until the very air felt heavy with it. Lord Darius bowed stiffly once more before withdrawing, but not before casting a final venomous glance at Aria. The message was clear. This was her fault. As the door closed, her chest ached with the implications of what she'd just learned. Not only had she disrupted court politics, she'd interfered with carefully laid plans for a political union. You didn't tell me, she said quietly, struggling to keep her voice steady. Kalen turned to her, his expression unreadable. There was nothing to tell. I never agreed to mate with Magnus' daughter. Yet, despite his words, doubt crept through Aria like poison. The nobles wanted her gone, that much had been clear from the beginning. But now she understood they had someone specific in mind to replace her. More importantly, she finally recognized the political cost of Kalen's impulsive marking. He had alienated powerful allies, destabilized long-standing alliances, all for, what? Her? It made no sense. Eventually, she voiced the thought that had been building since that first day. Maybe they're right. Maybe the mark should be removed. A growl rose in his throat, primal and fierce. The sound reverberated through the chamber, making the fine hairs on Aria's arms rise. Before she could move, he had her backed against the wall, his powerful body caging her in without actually touching her. Never say that again, he commanded, his voice barely human. Her breath caught as his face lowered to hers, close enough that she could feel the heat of his skin. The bond between them flared white-hot, her wolf responding to his proximity with a hunger that frightened her. The mark is permanent, he continued, each word deliberate and fierce. You are mine, Aria Vale. Nothing will change that. She should have been terrified. 3 days ago, she would have been. Yet now, with her back literally against the wall and the most powerful alpha in the realm looming over her, what Aria felt wasn't fear, but something far more dangerous, connection. Why? She whispered, the question that had haunted her since the moment his teeth had found her skin. Why me? For a moment, something vulnerable flashed across his face, so quickly she might have imagined it. Then his expression hardened once more. Be ready by sundown, he said instead of answering, stepping back and leaving her suddenly cold in his absence. I'll send guards to escort you. As he turned to leave, frustration surged through Aria, unexpected and powerful. Her voice trembled when she called after him. That's not an answer. He paused at the door, his broad shoulders tensing. For a heartbeat, she thought he might turn back, might finally give her the explanation she so desperately needed. Instead, he continued forward without another word. With his scent in the air, pine and leather and power, Aria sank into a nearby chair, her legs suddenly too weak to support her. As the silence roared around her, she confronted the truth she'd been avoiding. She had been thrust into a political battlefield without weapons or armor. That night, as she entered the great hall on Kaelin's arm, the sea of faces turned toward them was a study in barely concealed hostility. Nobles from all 12 high packs had gathered, their judgmental gazes tracking her every movement, waiting for the slightest misstep. Among them stood a striking woman with flame-red hair and the bearing of an alpha, Magnus' daughter, undoubtedly. Her green eyes met Aria's across the room, cold with assessment and something sharper, determination. As though fate whispered warnings in her ear, Aria understood with perfect clarity. This wasn't just about a mark on her neck or a disrupted political alliance. This was about power. And the wolves surrounding her wouldn't rest until they'd torn her from Kaelin's side. Under the weight of their collective stares, Aria squeezed Kaelin's arm slightly. His response was immediate, a possessive hand covering hers, a subtle shift that placed his body between her and the most hostile gazes. Remember, he murmured for her ears alone, you wear my mark. That makes you stronger than any of them. As they descended the steps into the wolves' den, Aria lifted her chin and stepped forward into the battle she never asked for but could no longer avoid. First came the dreams, vivid, wild visions of running through moonlit forests on 4 paws, her wolf's body strong and free in ways Aria had never experienced. Then came the hunger, not for food, but for something primal she couldn't name. And finally, the unbearable awareness of him, even through walls and distance, like an invisible thread pulling her toward the Alpha King. The mark was changing her, awakening parts of herself that had been dormant for 20 years. Aria touched the silvery scar on her neck, now a permanent part of her. But was it making her his, or making her herself? A week had passed since the disastrous banquet where Alpha Magnus and his daughter Lyra had made their intentions painfully clear. The Alpha daughter had smiled with razor-sharp politeness and whispered, "Enjoy your temporary position," when Kaelin wasn't listening. The nobles had closed ranks, treating Aria with thinly veiled contempt. Yet somehow she had survived that night, standing tall beside the king despite her trembling knees. What followed was unexpected. Rather than keeping her secluded in the royal chambers as she'd feared, Kaelin had begun bringing her into his world, not as an ornament or trophy, but as something more puzzling. As a companion. "Concentrate," Kaelin commanded, his deep voice echoing through the private training arena. His massive form circled her, predatory and graceful. "Feel your wolf. She's there." Aria closed her eyes, sweat beading on her forehead. For the 3rd day in a row, they had come to this isolated space deep beneath the palace, a circular stone chamber where generations of royal wolves had learned to shift. With every heartbeat, she searched for that elusive connection, that spark of wildness the mark had awakened. "I'm trying," she whispered, frustration evident in her voice. From there, his approach softened unexpectedly. Kaelin moved behind her, close enough that his chest nearly touched her back. The bond between them hummed with energy, making her skin prickle with awareness. "Don't force it," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. "Your wolf isn't separate from you. She is you." Without warning, his hands came to rest on her shoulders, the touch sending fire racing through her veins. The space between them burned with possibility as his thumbs traced small circles against her skin. In that moment, something inside her shifted. Beneath her ribs, a presence stirred, curious, cautious, wild. Her world tilted as the sensation grew stronger. Her bones remembered something they'd never known, an ancient memory of transformation. As her wolf stirred, pressing against the boundaries of her human form, Aria gasped. "I feel her," she breathed, wonder and fear tangling in her chest. Kalen's grip tightened slightly. "Now let her come forward. Don't fight it." As if pulled by a string, Aria's body began to change. Pain blossomed across her skin, her muscles stretching and reforming. A cry escaped her lips as she fell to her knees, the transformation consuming her. The moment their eyes locked, Kalen dropped to a crouch before her, his midnight eyes never leaving hers. "Breathe," he instructed, his voice an anchor in the storm of sensation. "Focus on my voice, on our bond." Time stood still as Aria's humanity gave way to something older, wilder. Her vision shifted, colors fading as scents intensified. The air carried stories now, the earthy scent of the underground chamber, the lingering traces of other wolves who had trained here, and most potently, the intoxicating smell of her mate. Because that's who he was, she realized with startling clarity. Not just the king who had marked her, but her mate. The knowledge settled into her bones as naturally as the shift itself. Without thinking, she lunged forward, her newly formed paws striking against Kalen's chest. A beat later, she found herself pinned beneath him, his human form restraining her wolf with practiced ease. "Easy," he rumbled, his eyes glowing amber with approval despite his firm hold. "You need to learn control." Her wolf pressed forward, testing his strength, not out of defiance, but curiosity. The response was immediate. Kalen's power washed over her like a physical force, not crushing but containing. Teaching. Eventually, he released her, stepping back to give her space. Her wolf body felt strange and wonderful, lightweight yet powerful, her senses sharper than she'd ever imagined possible. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, Aria took her first tentative steps, adjusting to 4 legs instead of 2. Kalen watched her with unexpected patience, his expression softer than she'd ever seen it. "Run," he encouraged, gesturing to the perimeter of the chamber. "Feel your strength." Her body moved on instinct, muscles working in perfect harmony as she circled the arena once, then again with growing confidence. The exhilaration was unlike anything she'd experienced, the freedom of movement, the raw power in her limbs. When she finally stopped before him, tongue lolling and eyes bright with joy, something remarkable happened. Kalen smiled, a real smile that transformed his austere features and reached his eyes. "You're beautiful," he said simply, the words sending a strange flutter through her chest. That night, exhausted from her first shift, Aria slept deeply in her chambers adjoining the king's. With every breath, the bond pulsed between them, steadier now, more defined. Yet questions still plagued her. Why her? What had made the Alpha King choose a servant when noble wolves like Lyra were available? More importantly, what did he truly want from her? Come morning, she found answers, or at least the beginning of them. "Get dressed," Kalen commanded, entering her chambers without warning. Wear something practical. Before she could ask questions, he was gone again, leaving Aria to hurriedly don the riding clothes laid out by her new handmaidens. By the time she emerged, the sun was just beginning to crest the horizon, painting the sky in breathtaking shades of pink and gold. Kaelin waited in the courtyard, two magnificent horses saddled beside him. Without preamble, he lifted her onto the smaller mount, a beautiful dappled mare with intelligent eyes. "Where are we going?" she finally dared to ask as they rode through the palace gates, a small contingent of guards following at a respectful distance. Instead of answering, he urged his stallion faster. "Keep up," he called over his shoulder, a challenge in his voice. As the silence stretched between them, Aria gave herself over to the experience, the rhythm of hoofbeats, the wind in her hair, the gradually changing landscape as they left the manicured palace grounds for wilder terrain. Soon after, they crested a hill and Kaelin finally drew his horse to a halt. The view stole Aria's breath. A vast forest spread before them, mist rising from the canopy like spirits dancing in the early morning light. "The sacred grove," he explained, his deep voice reverent. "The heart of our territory." Aria's eyes widened. The sacred grove was legendary among servants, a place where only royal wolves were permitted to tread, where the first Alpha King had been blessed by the moon goddess herself. "Why did you bring me here?" she whispered, unable to tear her gaze from the ancient trees. Kaelin turned to her, his expression serious. "Because this is your heritage now. As my mate, you must know our traditions, our sacred places." The wind carried his name through her thoughts as the significance of his words sank in. This wasn't just a ride, it was an initiation. They dismounted, leaving the horses with the guards who remained at the forest's edge. As Kaelin led her into the dense woods, Aria felt the atmosphere change, the air growing thicker, charged with something she couldn't name. "Only royal blood may enter these woods," he explained as they walked a nearly invisible path. "Or those who bear royal marks." Her hand drifted unconsciously to her neck. "Is that why the nobles hate me? Because I can enter places they cannot." Kaelin's jaw tightened. They hate what they cannot control. Deep in the forest's heart, they reached a clearing where a perfect circle of white stones surrounded an ancient oak tree. The massive trunk twisted upward, its branches spreading like protective arms over the sacred space. "This is the first tree," Kaelin said, his voice dropping to nearly a whisper. "Our pack has gathered here for millennia to celebrate the full moon, to crown new kings and queens, to mark mates." Under the weight of his stare, Aria approached the tree cautiously. Something pulled her forward, not Kaelin's influence, but something older, primal. Her fingers brushed the rough bark, and a shiver ran through her entire body. "It recognizes you," he murmured, watching her closely. Without warning, images flooded Aria's mind. Wolves running beneath a full moon, ceremonial fires burning bright, kings and queens crowned with silver circlets. The visions overwhelmed her, making her knees buckle. To make things worse, the flood of images didn't stop. Generations of royal wolves flashed before her eyes, their triumphs, their losses, their sacred bonds. And something else, something that made her heart stutter in her chest, a face so similar to her own that it couldn't be coincidence. A woman with her features, her eyes, standing proudly beside a king of old. When the visions finally receded, she found herself in Kaelin's arms, his concerned face hovering above hers. "What did you see?" he demanded, his voice urgent. Her voice trembled as she described the images, ending with the woman who looked like her. To her surprise, Kaelin nodded as if confirming something he'd suspected. "The tree shows what it needs to show," he said cryptically. "I brought you here to help you understand your place, Aria. Not as a servant elevated beyond her station, but as someone who belongs." As the echo faded around them, Aria realized with startling clarity that Kaelin was sharing parts of himself no one else ever saw, the sacred traditions of his lineage, the hidden heart of his kingdom. Between one breath and the next, something fundamental shifted between them. The bond deepened, not just physically but emotionally, as barriers crumbled on both sides. Later, as the sun began its descent, they sat together on a fallen log near the edge of the sacred grove. Kaelin had been unusually talkative throughout the day, telling her stories of his childhood, of lessons learned within these very woods. "I still don't understand," Aria finally said, voicing the question that had haunted her since that first day. "Why did you choose me?" In the quiet that followed, her heart raced in anticipation. Would he finally give her the answer she sought? As dusk approached, Kaelin's expression softened in the fading light. His hand found hers, the touch sending familiar warmth through her body. "I didn't choose the mark," he admitted, surprising her. "My wolf did. The moment I scented you, something inside me recognized you. Not as a servant. As mine." Her breath caught at his words, at the naked honesty in his voice. "There's more to you than you know, Aria Vale," he continued, his thumb tracing patterns on her palm. "More than either of us fully understand yet." As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Aria found herself leaning closer to him, drawn by a force greater than herself. For the first time since the marking, she felt not fear or confusion, but something dangerously close to belonging. When his lips finally met hers, gentle despite the power contained in his massive frame, the bond between them erupted in blinding intensity, confirming what her heart had begun to accept. She was his, and somehow, impossibly, he was becoming hers. They say blood always tells. But what if everything you knew about your own blood was a lie? Aria stared at the ancient scroll unfurled across the library table, her fingers trembling as they traced the faded family tree. There, at the bottom of a branch thought long extinct, was a name that changed everything. Vale. Not a common name given to a nameless servant, but the remnant of a powerful alpha bloodline, one that had supposedly been wiped out 2 decades ago. Her bloodline. The room seemed to spin around her as pieces of a puzzle she hadn't known she was solving clicked into terrible, wonderful place. She'd spent the past week in a kind of dream, the bond between her and Kaelin growing stronger with each passing day. Her wolf had emerged fully now, growing more confident with each shift. The nobles still regarded her with thinly veiled contempt, but something had shifted subtly in her interactions with the king. The tentative trust between them had deepened into something that made her chest ache when he looked at her. Despite that, questions still haunted her. The visions at the sacred grove had planted seeds of suspicion that refused to be ignored. Her face in the ancient tree's memories, a face too similar to be coincidence. And then Princess Maya had summoned her to the royal archives, an enigmatic smile playing at her lips. "It's time you learned who you really are," she'd said, leading Aria through hidden corridors to this dust-filled sanctuary. Now, as the silence stretched between them, Maya watched her carefully. "Do you understand what you're looking at?" Aria's voice trembled when she finally spoke. "This can't be right." Before either could speak further, the heavy library doors swung open. Kaelin stood in the entrance, his expression unreadable as he took in the scene before him. Aria bent over ancient genealogies, Maya looking far too pleased with herself. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, Aria met his gaze directly. Did you know? The question hung in the air between them, sharp and demanding. The moment their eyes locked, something shifted in Kaelin's posture. It wasn't guilt she saw there, but caution. Not at first, he admitted, crossing the room with predatory grace. I suspected after the marking, but I needed proof. Maya slipped discreetly from the room, leaving them alone amid the towering shelves of forgotten history. Under the weight of his stare, Aria fought to organize her chaotic thoughts. I don't understand, she whispered, gesturing to the genealogy. If this is true, why was I raised as a servant? Why didn't anyone tell me? As though fate demanded it, thunder rolled in the distance, echoing the turmoil in Aria's chest. She pressed a hand against the nearest bookshelf, steadying herself. So you investigated me, she concluded. Kaelin nodded once. I had to know if what I suspected was true. Deep down, she knew the truth of what he wasn't saying. The political ramifications of their mating went far beyond a mere breach of tradition. The king had not just marked a servant, he had marked the last surviving member of a once rival house. Her name hung in the air between them, suddenly weighted with history she'd never known she carried. Aria Vale, not a nameless servant, but the daughter of Alpha Thorn's greatest rival. What happens now? She asked, her voice barely audible over the gathering storm outside. Kaelin's expression shifted, determination hardening his features. Now, he said, we prepare for war. Moments later, the library doors burst open once more. This time Princess Maya entered with urgency, her usual composure fractured. Brother, she said, ignoring all protocol, the Lunar Council has called an emergency session. They're demanding your presence and hers. The timing was too perfect to be coincidence. As if the forest watched their discovery, the council had chosen this exact moment to act. Kaelin's response was immediate and dangerous, a low growl building in his throat. Who told them? Maya shook her head. I don't know, but it doesn't matter. They know, Kaelin. Someone found the same records we did. Her world tilted as Aria absorbed this new threat. What will they do? In that moment, something in Kaelin's demeanor changed, the controlled ruler giving way to something more primal, more deadly. They will try to separate us, he said simply. They will demand I renounce the mark and claim it was made in ignorance of your true identity. As her wolf stirred restlessly beneath her skin, Aria realized she had a choice to make. She could run, disappear into the wilderness, as her mother must have planned. Or she could stand and fight for a birthright she hadn't known was hers until moments ago. Her body moved on instinct, straightening to its full height. Let's go face them, she said, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. The moment the three of them entered the council chambers, Aria knew something had fundamentally changed. The nobles no longer looked at her with mere contempt, now their gazes held fear. Real fear. High Alpha Varek stood at the center of the semicircular table, ancient texts spread before him. His silver-streaked hair seemed to stand on end with barely contained rage. Your Majesty, he began without preamble. We have discovered disturbing information about your companion. Kaelin's expression remained impassive as he led Aria to the two ornate chairs positioned before the council. His hand never left the small of her back, a silent declaration of support. Aria Vale, Varek continued, spitting her surname like a curse, is the last surviving member of the traitor pack that nearly destroyed the kingdom 20 years ago. The space between them burned as whispers erupted around the chamber. Aria kept her chin lifted, refusing to cower before their judgment. Is that all? Kaelin asked, his voice dangerously soft. Varric's eyes widened slightly at the king's calm response. "You knew?" he demanded. "I suspected," Kaelin replied. "Now I know for certain." Lady Callista surged to her feet, her jeweled fingers trembling with indignation. "This changes everything. The mark must be dissolved immediately. You cannot be mated to the daughter of traitors." In the stillness that followed, Aria felt something shift within her chest, pride unfurling where shame should have been. These wolves had hunted her family to extinction, forced her mother to hide her only child among servants, stolen 20 years of her heritage from her. Her voice trembled when she finally spoke, addressing the council directly for the first time. "My father fought for what he believed was right," she said, the words coming from somewhere deep and instinctual. "As did yours. That doesn't make either of them traitors, it makes them alphas." The council chambers exploded in outrage, voices overlapping in a cacophony of protest. Through it all, Kaelin remained seated beside her, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Lord Darius slammed his fist against the table, silencing the room. "The law is clear," he snarled. "A royal mate must strengthen the throne, not threaten it. The daughter of Raphael can never be queen." Without another word, Kaelin rose to his feet. The sudden movement sent a ripple of tension through the room as every wolf present responded instinctively to the Alpha King's dominance. "You forget yourselves," he said quietly. "The law is what I say it is." As the sky darkened outside, shadows dancing between the council members, Aria watched the nobles exchange glances. Something unspoken passed between them, a decision, a plan. "Very well," Varric said finally, his tone falsely conciliatory. "If your majesty insists on keeping this, mate, then the council will not interfere further." The tension broke, but not in the way Aria expected. Something about Varric's too-easy capitulation sent warning signals racing through her mind. As they departed the chambers, Maya fell into step beside them, her expression troubled. "They gave in too easily," she murmured, echoing Aria's thoughts. Kaelin nodded once, his jaw tight. "They're planning something." While her pulse raced with newly awakened fear, Aria felt something else blooming in her chest, determination. She was no longer just Aria the servant, nor merely Aria the king's unexpected mate. She was Aria Vale, daughter of Alphas, the last survivor of a proud lineage. That night, as moonlight filtered through the tall windows of her chambers, Aria stood before the mirror, truly seeing herself for the first time. The woman who stared back at her had her father's eyes, her mother's delicate features, a legacy written in her very bones. As the mark tingled on her neck, she heard Kaelin's approach before the door opened. He entered silently, his gaze finding hers in the mirror. "Now you understand," he said quietly. "Why they fear you. Why they fear us together." Her soul answered his words with a certainty that surprised her. "Because together we unite two powerful bloodlines that were meant to be enemies." What followed was a silence so complete Aria could hear the beating of her own heart. Kaelin crossed the room until he stood behind her, his reflection joining hers in the mirror. "They will come for you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Not openly, not yet. But they're already plotting." As though the forest watched them through the windows, the night seemed to hold its breath. Aria turned to face him, no longer afraid to meet his gaze directly. "Let them come," she said, surprising herself with the steel in her voice. "I am Aria Vale, and I wear the Alpha King's mark." A growl rose in his throat, not threatening but approving. His hand cupped her cheek, thumb tracing the line of her jaw with unexpected tenderness. "Yes," he agreed, those midnight eyes burning into hers. And soon they will all remember what that name means. They came for her at midnight, 6 shadows moving with lethal silence through the royal wing. The first assassin made it 3 steps into her chambers before Aria's newly awakened senses detected him, the subtle shift in air currents, the barely there scent of unfamiliar wolf. Her eyes snapped open in the darkness, her body already moving on instinct as a silver blade whistled through the air where her throat had been seconds before. The bond flared like wildfire, and she knew without doubt that Kaelin felt her fear, felt the danger. But would he reach her in time? 3 weeks had passed since the revelation of her true identity. 3 weeks of veiled threats and whispered conspiracies. The palace had become a battleground of shifting alliances as nobles scrambled to position themselves in the wake of her shocking heritage. Some sought to curry favor with the future queen, others plotted her downfall, but none remained neutral. As the blade arced toward her again, Aria rolled from the bed, her nightgown tangling around her legs. Without thinking, she reached for her wolf, the transformation coming faster now with practice. Bones cracked and shifted, her human scream turning to a feral growl as fur erupted across her skin. "The veil bitch is shifting," one of the assassins hissed. "Take her now." Before she could complete the transformation, a burning pain lanced through her shoulder, silver, by the way it seared her flesh and slowed the shift. Her wolf howled in rage and pain, caught between forms. What followed was chaos. The door to her chambers exploded inward, wood splintering as Kaelin burst through in full wolf form, massive, white, terrifying in his fury. His jaws closed around the nearest assassin's throat, the sickening crunch of breaking bones filling the room. Meanwhile, Aria fought through the silver's burn, forcing her partial shift to completion. Her newly formed claws raked across an attacker's face, drawing blood and a howl of pain. The scent of blood and fear filled the chamber as the assassins realized their ambush had failed. In the span of a breath, the fight shifted. 2 royal guards joined the fray, their coordinated movements speaking of years of training. Princess Maya appeared in the doorway, her own wolf form smaller than her brother's, but no less deadly as she launched herself at an assassin trying to escape. By the time the palace guards subdued the last attacker, the royal chambers resembled a battlefield. Blood stained the marble floors, the fine furnishings lay in splinters, and in the center of it all stood Kaelin, shifted back to human form, his naked body splattered with blood as he cradled Aria's injured wolf form in his arms. "Silver," he growled to the royal physician who rushed in. "They used silver on her." As the doctor worked to extract the silver shard from her shoulder, Aria whimpered, the pain nearly unbearable. Through her wolf's eyes, she watched Kaelin's expression shift from rage to something far more dangerous, cold, calculating fury. "Find out who sent them," he commanded the captain of his guard. "Question the survivors. Use whatever means necessary." With every heartbeat, the bond pulsed between them, Kaelin's rage feeding into Aria's pain in an endless loop. Yet beneath the fury, she felt something else: fear. Not her own, but his. Fear of losing her. "Your Majesty," High Alpha Varek's voice came from the doorway, his tone falsely concerned as he surveyed the carnage. "This is a terrible breach of security. Perhaps the Veil Woman should be moved to a more protected location." Despite the pain clouding her thoughts, Aria noted how Varek avoided using her name or title, still refusing to acknowledge her rightful place. Something inside her shifted as anger replaced fear, her wolf surging with newfound strength. Before Kaelin could respond, Aria forced herself back into human form, the transformation agonizing with the silver's poison still in her system. Her voice trembled but held firm as she addressed Varric directly. "My name is Aria Vale," she said, clutching a bloodied sheet to her naked body. "And I am the Alpha King's marked mate. You will address me as such, or not at all." The tension broke as Varric's face contorted with barely concealed hatred. But before he could respond, Kaelin's power filled the room, a crushing wave of dominance that made even the royal guards lower their eyes. "Get out," he commanded Varric. "Everyone out. Now." As the room cleared, leaving only Aria, Kaelin, and Maya, the princess approached with fresh clothing. Without warning, Maya embraced her, the gesture so unexpected that Aria momentarily forgot her pain. "You were magnificent," Maya whispered in her ear. "A true alpha female." The moment their eyes locked, Aria saw approval in Maya's gaze and something else. Respect. It sent a strange warmth through her chest that had nothing to do with the bond. While the forest held its breath outside the shattered windows, Kaelin paced the length of the chamber, his naked form a study in lethal grace and barely controlled fury. "This ends now," he declared, his voice vibrating with rage. "No more politics. No more patience." Maya nodded grimly. "The assassination attempt crosses a line. You have caused tact." Her body moved on instinct, reaching for the clothes Maya offered. As Aria dressed, wincing as fabric passed over her wounded shoulder, she tried to process what had just happened. 6 assassins had come for her not to kidnap, but to kill. The nobles weren't just trying to remove her from Kaelin's side. They wanted to erase her existence entirely. Between one breath and the next, understanding dawned. "It's not just about me being from a rival bloodline," she said slowly. "They're afraid of what our children might be." Kaelin stopped pacing, his midnight eyes finding hers across the room. "Yes," he confirmed. "A child of both Thorn and Vale blood would unite the 2 most powerful alpha lines in history. They fear what that might mean for the power balance they've enjoyed for generations." His voice softened as he approached her, hands gently examining her bandaged shoulder. "How did you know they were coming?" Most wolves wouldn't have sensed them. Despite the night's horror, a small smile touched Aria's lips. "I grew up as a servant, remember? We learn to hear approaching footsteps before our masters do." What's worse, she realized the assassination attempt had been carefully planned. The attackers had used silver weapons specifically designed to counter her wolf abilities. They had known exactly where she slept, how to access her chambers. Someone close to the royal family had helped them. As fire bloomed beneath her skin from the lingering silver poison, Aria voiced the thought all 3 of them were having. "There's a traitor in your inner circle." Without thinking, Kaelin gathered her against his chest, his arms a protective cage around her smaller frame. The bond hummed between them, his rage now tempered with tenderness that still surprised her. Kill any wolf who spoke falsely. It was rarely used and never demanded of high-ranking alphas without serious cause. "This has gone far enough," Lord Darius said, rising to his feet. "The girl is a weakness, Your Majesty. A political liability. A remnant of a traitor bloodline that should have ended 20 years ago." Without warning, he turned his attention directly to Aria, his lip curling in contempt. "You don't belong here," he spat. "You never will." As if pulled by a string, Kaelin moved with alpha speed, crossing the chamber in a heartbeat. His hand closed around Lord Darius's throat, lifting the smaller alpha from his feet with terrifying ease. "She belongs where I say she belongs," Kaelin growled, his eyes shifting to wolf amber. "And I say she belongs at my side." The council watched in horrified silence as their king held one of their own at arm's length, Darius's feet dangling above the floor. When Kaelin finally released him, Darius collapsed, gasping for air, a hand at his bruised throat. "You stand before me," Kaelin addressed the council, his voice resonant with power and calm. "I made a weakness? Let me be perfectly clear, she is my strength. And any who move against her, move against me." Her breath caught as Kaelin returned to her side, his hand finding hers in a public display of unity that sent ripples of shock through the assembled nobles. Never had the Alpha King shown such tenderness before his council. "The attempt on Aria Vale's life is an act of treason," he declared, "and it will be answered accordingly." What followed was a purge unlike anything the 12 High Pacts had seen in generations. 3 council members were immediately arrested, their blood oaths revealing their involvement in the assassination plot. Others were stripped of positions, territories reassigned, alliances shattered and reformed in the span of a single morning. Through it all, Aria stood at Kaelin's side, her presence a declaration of his intent, her Vale bloodline no longer hidden but celebrated. As the court revolted against centuries of tradition, she watched the old order crumbling before her eyes. By sunset, word had spread throughout the kingdom. The Alpha King had chosen his mate, not to spite her Vale blood, but because of it. And he would burn the world to keep her safe. As shadows danced between the council members who remained, Aria felt the weight of her new reality settling onto her shoulders. This was no longer about survival. It was about legacy. About rebuilding what had been lost and creating something new from the ashes of the old. That night, standing on the balcony overlooking the kingdom that might one day be hers, Aria whispered the words she had been too afraid to voice until now. "I choose you too," she said, as Kaelin's arms encircled her from behind. "Not because you're king, but because you're mine." The wind carried his name through the night as Kaelin turned her to face him, his expression more open than she had ever seen it. "Then let them try to take you from me," he growled, the words both threat and promise. "I dare them." Freedom tastes like ashes when it comes with the price of his heart. Aria Vale stood at the window of her private chambers, watching dawn break over a kingdom in chaos. The silver scroll in her hands felt impossibly heavy for such a small thing. 6 simple words written in the High Alpha's own hand. The mark can be removed. Choose wisely. After everything, the assassination attempt, the council purge, the weeks of growing closer to Kaelin, the Lunar Council had played their final, desperate card. They would release her from the bond, erase her connection to the Alpha King, grant her complete freedom to walk away. All she had to do was say yes. And just like that, everything changed again. A month had passed since the failed assassination. A month of political upheaval as Kaelin systematically dismantled the power structures that had threatened her. Noble houses fell from grace, new alliances formed, and through it all, Aria had remained at his side, learning to navigate her new position with growing confidence. Yet beneath the surface, whispers persisted. Nobles who'd survived the purge still regarded her with suspicion. Servants who'd once been her friends now bowed awkwardly in her presence, unsure how to treat the girl who'd risen so far above them. And Kaelin, powerful, dangerous, increasingly possessive Kaelin, had begun to withdraw, as if preparing himself for something inevitable. Now she understood why. He'd known this offer was coming. With every heartbeat, the bond pulsed between them, a constant reminder of what she would lose if she accepted the council's proposal. For as long as she remembered, Aria had dreamed of freedom, of choice, of agency, of a life beyond service. Yet now that it was offered, the prospect felt hollow. Before she could move from the window, the door to her chambers opened. Princess Maya entered, her expression carefully neutral as she took in the scroll clutched in Aria's hands. "So they've played their last card," Maya said, crossing the room to stand beside her at the window. "Desperate men make desperate offers." "Is it true?" Aria asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Can the mark truly be removed?" As the silence stretched between them, Maya's gaze shifted to the distant mountains. "Yes," she admitted finally. "There is an ancient ritual. Painful. Dangerous. Few survive it. But yes, it can be done." Under the weight of Maya's stare, Aria felt her throat tighten. Did Kalen know this was coming? He suspected. Maya answered carefully. "The council couldn't force him to remove his mark, but they could offer you the choice to walk away." In the quiet that followed, Aria turned the scroll over in her hands, studying the ornate wax seal that bore the crescent moon of the Lunar Council. "Why now? After everything that's happened?" Maya's laugh was sharp, humorless. "Because they've finally realized they can't defeat my brother through direct means. So they've found his weakness." "Me," Aria said, the word falling like a stone between them. "No," Maya corrected, surprising her. "Not you. His love for you." Her world tilted at the word neither she nor Kalen had dared to speak aloud. Love. Was that what this bond had become? This connection that had started with a bite, with ancient magic neither of them fully understood? Deep down, she knew the truth. The mark had initiated their bond, but what had grown between them in the weeks since transcended magic? The way he looked at her when they were alone, the gentle touch of his hands, the rare smiles he showed no one else, those weren't created by any mark. With his scent in the air lingering in her chambers though he hadn't visited since the previous evening, Aria felt her resolve strengthening. "Where is he?" "The sacred grove," Maya replied. "He goes there when he needs to think." Without warning, Maya reached out, her fingers closing around Aria's wrist with unexpected gentleness. "Before you decide, you should know something," she said, her voice dropping to nearly a whisper. "If you choose to leave, it won't just break the bond. It will break him." The moment their eyes locked, Aria saw the truth in Maya's midnight gaze, so similar to her brother's, yet softer, more openly emotional. "He's never marked anyone before you," Maya continued. "Never even considered it." While the forest held its breath outside her window, Aria made her decision. "I need a horse." Soon after, she was riding through the palace gates, 2 royal guards following at a respectful distance. The path to the sacred grove was familiar now. She had visited it with Kalen several times since that first journey, each trip revealing more of the royal traditions he was so carefully teaching her. As fire bloomed beneath her skin from the exertion of the ride, Aria rehearsed what she would say to him. How could she explain the tumult of emotions the council's offer had stirred in her? The strange mix of anger and hope, outrage and temptation? Between one breath and the next, the sacred grove appeared before her, ancient trees standing sentinel around the perimeter. She dismounted, instructing the guards to remain outside the tree line. This conversation needed to happen in private. Despite that, she knew Kalen would already be aware of her approach. His senses were sharper than hers, his connection to these woods deeper. As her wolf stirred restlessly beneath her skin, she followed the nearly invisible path to the clearing with the first tree. And there he was. Alpha King Kalen Thorn stood with his back to her, one hand pressed against the ancient oak's massive trunk. Even from a distance, she could see the tension in his shoulders, the rigid line of his spine. "You know why I'm here," she said without preamble. He turned slowly, his midnight eyes finding hers across the clearing. Something in his expression made her heart stutter painfully in her chest, resignation, as if he'd already accepted losing her. "The council sent their offer," he confirmed, his deep voice carefully controlled. "As I knew they would." From there, Aria crossed the clearing until only a few feet separated them. The bond between them hummed with awareness, with something deeper than the physical attraction that had first drawn them together. "You could have told me," she said, unable to keep the hurt from her voice. "You knew this was possible." As though fate demanded it, Kalen's expression softened slightly. "Would it have mattered?" he asked. "Would knowing you had an escape route have changed anything between us?" Before the words left her lips, Aria realized he was right. Nothing would have been different. She still would have fallen for him, mark or no mark. "They think I'll choose freedom," she said instead. "That I'll walk away from you, from all of this." In the stillness that followed, birds continued their songs overhead, oblivious to the drama unfolding beneath the ancient branches. Kalen's eyes never left her face, studying her with an intensity that still made her breath catch. "And will you?" he asked finally, the question barely audible despite the clearing's perfect silence. As if the forest watched them with bated breath, Aria took another step forward, close enough now to feel the heat radiating from his body. "They don't understand," she said, her voice stronger now. "They think I'm trapped by your mark, by some magic I didn't choose." Without thinking, her hand rose to touch the mark on her neck, the silver scar that had changed everything. "But the truth is, I'm more free with you than I ever was without you." The tension broke as something flickered in Kalen's eyes, hope, cautious and fragile. Aria. Her name hung in the air between them, weighted with everything he couldn't bring himself to say. The Alpha King, who commanded armies with a word, who struck fear in the hearts of his enemies, couldn't voice the simple truth they both felt. So Aria did it for him. "I choose you," she said simply. "I have chosen you every day since the marking, not because I had to, but because I wanted to." Under the weight of his stare, she felt her courage growing. "The council thinks offering me freedom will weaken you, will drive us apart. They don't understand that true freedom isn't about absence of commitment, it's about choosing your commitments." Without warning, Kalen closed the distance between them, his powerful hands framing her face with unexpected gentleness. The bond flared between them, hot and electric and overwhelming. "Say it again," he demanded, his voice rough with emotion. A smile curved Aria's lips as she looked up at him, no longer afraid to meet his gaze, to challenge him, to love him. "I choose you, Kalen Thorne. Mark or no mark. King or no king. I choose you." As the mark tingled on her neck, something shifted in Kalen's expression, the last of his restraint falling away. When his lips claimed hers, the kiss was different from those they'd shared before, deeper, more desperate, as if he'd been holding back until this moment. Her body moved on instinct, arms winding around his neck, as she pressed herself against him. Through the bond, she felt his relief, his joy, his fierce, possessive pride. He had marked her, but her choice to stay, to claim him in return, held power all its own. Eventually, he broke the kiss, pressing his forehead against hers as they both caught their breath. "The ritual to remove a mark," he said quietly, "it would likely kill you. That's why I didn't tell you. I couldn't bear even the possibility." Her chest ached at the admission. "You think I would have considered it?" she asked, genuine surprise in her voice. Kalen's eyes met hers, vulnerability naked in his gaze. You've spent your life with no choices, Aria. I couldn't be the one to deny you this one. As though the forest watched over them, sunlight filtered through the ancient branches, dappling the clearing in patterns of gold. In that moment, Aria knew what needed to happen next, what her answer to the council must be. I want to claim you publicly, she said, the words surprising even her with their boldness. Before the entire kingdom. Her name hung in the air as Kaelin studied her face, surprise giving way to something darker, more heated. What are you suggesting? Between one breath and the next, Aria found her confidence. The council offered me freedom if I leave you. I want to show everyone, that I'm choosing to stay. That I claim you as much as you've claimed me. What's worse, she realized, was that she was proposing something unprecedented. In wolf tradition, alphas claimed their mates, not the other way around. Omegas, especially, never initiated such bonds. Yet despite that, Kaelin's expression shifted from surprise to fierce approval. You want to mark me, he said, not a question but a statement of understanding. Her heart skipped at his immediate comprehension. Yes, she confirmed. Before the council, before the nobles, before everyone who thought I was a weakness you'd regret. A growl rose in his throat, not threatening but possessive. Do you understand what you're proposing? No Alpha King has ever borne a mate's mark. It would change everything. Good, Aria said simply. Everything needs to change. As if summoned by her boldness, Kaelin's smile spread slowly across his face, dangerous, approving. The veil fire, he murmured, almost to himself. Your father had it too. The courage to challenge tradition. Her voice trembled slightly as she pressed further. Will you allow it? Will you let me claim you as mine as you've claimed me as yours? Without another word, Kaelin tilted his head, exposing the vulnerable line of his throat, a gesture of submission so shocking from an Alpha King that Aria momentarily froze. The symbolism wasn't lost on her. This wasn't just acceptance of her proposal, it was a complete overturning of every hierarchy that had defined their world. Not here, he said, voice rough with emotion. When we do this, it will be before witnesses who can never deny what they've seen. The wind carried his name through the clearing as understanding dawned. Kaelin wasn't just agreeing to her claim, he was making it a political statement, a revolution wrapped in a mating ritual. When, she asked, breathless with the implications. His midnight eyes burned into hers. Tomorrow. At the new moon gathering, when every noble house will be present. Her world tilted as she imagined it, standing before the entire kingdom, claiming the Alpha King as hers. Not as a servant elevated beyond her station, not as the last veil-seeking power, but as Aria, his equal, his balance, his chosen mate. As the sun climbed higher, dappling the clearing with shifting patterns of light, Kaelin pulled her against him once more. His arms encircled her waist, his forehead pressing against hers in a gesture that felt more intimate than any kiss. Let them try to separate us now, he said, his voice both promise and challenge. Let them see what happens when a veil and a thorn truly unite. In the quiet that followed, Aria closed her eyes, savoring the moment of perfect understanding between them. Tomorrow would change everything for them, for the kingdom, for the future they would build together. Between them, something cracked, the final barrier falling away as the bond deepened into something ancient and unbreakable. Not just a magical connection created by a mark, but a choice made with clear eyes and full hearts. Take me back to the palace, she whispered against his lips. We have a council to answer. Power changes hands in blood and teeth and broken traditions. The great hall fell silent as Aria Vale walked down the central aisle, her steps measured and deliberate. No servant's garb for her tonight. She wore a gown of crimson and silver, the colors of both veil and thorn houses intertwined in a statement no one could misinterpret. The collective intake of breath from the assembled nobility echoed through the vaulted chamber as all eyes tracked her progress toward the dais where Kaelin waited. But it wasn't her dress that silenced the crowd. It was the silver ceremonial dagger gleaming at her side, a blade meant for one purpose only. Tonight, an Omega would claim an Alpha King, and nothing would ever be the same again. The new moon gathering had drawn every noble family from across the 12 high packs. They had come expecting an announcement of succession plans, perhaps even the official disavowal of the controversial mark Kaelin had placed on a servant girl. None had anticipated what Aria and Kaelin had planned instead. She actually came, Alpha Magnus muttered to Lady Callista, loud enough for Aria to hear as she passed. I was certain she'd take the council's offer and run. As the silence stretched around her, Aria kept her eyes forward, fixed on Kaelin's towering form. He stood alone on the royal dais, no council members flanking him as tradition dictated. His midnight eyes never left hers, watching her approach with an intensity that still made her heart race. Without warning, the great doors at the hall's entrance burst open once more. Princess Maya entered, followed by 12 wolves Aria had never seen before, alphas, by their bearing, but not from the royal court. They moved in formation, taking positions along the walls as whispers erupted throughout the hall. The border alphas, someone hissed nearby. Why would he summon them? Her body moved on instinct as she continued forward, the significance of these newcomers not lost on her. The border alphas controlled the 12 territories surrounding the kingdom's edges. They answered to the king alone, not to the Lunar Council or noble houses. Their presence tonight was deliberate, a show of force. What followed was a silence so complete Aria could hear her own heartbeat echoing in her ears. She reached the steps of the dais and ascended slowly, her gaze never leaving Kaelin's face. The bond between them hummed with energy, with anticipation, with something deeper than either had dared name until now. Nobles of the 12 high packs, Kaelin's voice filled the hall without effort, commanding attention through sheer power rather than volume. You were summoned tonight to witness a sacred bond. A beat later, whispers erupted again as confusion spread through the crowd. Kaelin raised a hand, silencing them instantly. You all know of the mark I placed on Aria Vale, he continued. What you don't know is that the Lunar Council recently offered her freedom, offered to remove my mark if she would leave the palace, leave me, leave the future we might build together. As the wind shifted through the high windows, bringing with it the scent of approaching rain, Aria felt hundreds of eyes fixed on her, calculating, assessing. They believed she would choose freedom over me, Kaelin said, a dangerous smile curving his lips. They were wrong. Without thinking, Aria stepped forward to stand beside him rather than before him, an equal, not a subject. The gesture wasn't lost on the crowd, several alphas shifting uncomfortably at this breach of protocol. But that isn't why you're here tonight, Kaelin continued. You're here because Aria Vale has made a request of me, one unprecedented in our kingdom's history, and I have granted it. Between one breath and the next, Kaelin turned to face her directly. With deliberate movements, he removed the ceremonial cloak from his shoulders, then the tunic beneath, baring his muscled torso to the assembled nobles. A collective gasp rose from the crowd as understanding dawned. As though fate demanded it, Kaelin knelt before her, tilting his head to expose the vulnerable column of his throat, a gesture of submission so shocking from an Alpha King that several nobles cried out in protest. "This is blasphemy!" High Alpha Varroc's voice cut through the chaos. "An Omega cannot claim an Alpha, let alone the king." Her chest ached with the weight of the moment as Kaelin remained kneeling, his eyes never leaving hers despite the uproar. This was more than a mating ritual. It was revolution wrapped in tradition, defiance cloaked in ceremony. The moment their eyes locked, Aria smiled. Let them protest. Let them rage. This wasn't for them. "I am Aria Vale," she declared, her voice carrying clearly through the hall. "Daughter of Alpha Rafe Vale and Omega Luna Serena Vale. Last of my bloodline, but not for much longer." Her hand closed around the ceremonial dagger at her side, drawing it in one fluid motion. The silver blade caught the light, sending reflections dancing across the vaulted ceiling. "I choose Alpha King Kaelin Thorne as my mate," she continued, each word deliberate and clear. "Not because he marked me first, but because he sees me as his equal. Not because of politics or power, but because of love." The word echoed through the great hall, shocking in its simplicity. Love. Not strategy, not alliance, not duty. Love. Without warning, Aria raised the dagger to her own palm, drawing a clean line across her skin. Blood welled bright against her pale flesh as she extended her bleeding hand over Kaelin's exposed neck. "With my blood, I mark you," she said, her voice never wavering as crimson droplets fell onto his skin. "With my teeth, I claim you." The tension broke as she lowered her mouth to the spot where her blood had marked him. Her teeth found his flesh, not breaking skin as an Alpha would, but pressing hard enough to leave an imprint, an Omega's claim, different but no less powerful. In that moment, something inside her shifted. Beneath her ribs, her wolf surged forward with newfound strength, with a dominance no Omega should possess. As her wolf pressed forward, instinct took over. Without conscious thought, her teeth broke skin after all, drawing a bead of blood that mingled with her own. The bond between them erupted in blinding intensity, white-hot and overwhelming. Through the connection, she felt Kaelin's surprise, then fierce joy, then something deeper, love so powerful it threatened to consume them both. Her world tilted as ancient magic swept through the hall, visible as a faint silver mist that swirled around them both. This wasn't supposed to happen. An Omega's claim was symbolic, not magical like an Alpha's mark. Yet the evidence was undeniable. Their bond had transformed into something new, something unprecedented. Under the weight of centuries of tradition crashing down around them, Aria pulled back, staring in wonder at the mark she'd left on Kaelin's throat, a perfect crescent moon, already silvering like her own scar. "Impossible," someone whispered from the crowd. "An Omega cannot." But she had. Somehow, the daughter of Alphas, hidden away as a servant, had manifested power that defied every known hierarchy in their world. With every heartbeat, the bond pulsed between them, stronger than before, equalized now that they both bore each other's marks. As Kaelin rose to his feet, his hand found hers, fingers interlacing in full view of the stunned nobles. "The Alpha King bears an Omega's mark," Maya announced, stepping forward to stand beside them. The ancient texts speak of such a union, not as abomination, but as balance restored. In the quiet that followed, Lord Darius pushed through the crowd, his face contorted with rage. "This mockery has gone far enough," he snarled. "No true Alpha would submit to an Omega's claim. No true king would kneel before a servant." Deep down, Aria had expected this, the final, desperate resistance of the old guard. What she hadn't expected was Kalen's response. Without another word, he reached for the crown that had rested on his head since his father's death, the ancient silver circlet that symbolized absolute authority over the 12 high packs, and removed it. The space between them burned as collective shock rippled through the hall. Removing the crown during a formal gathering was unprecedented. It could mean only one thing: abdication. "You're right about one thing, Darius," Kalen said, his voice dangerously soft. "No true king would kneel." Before anyone could respond, he placed the crown on a velvet cushion brought forward by a waiting attendant. "Which is why, from this night forward, there will be no king." Her heart skipped as Kalen turned to her, something like wonder in his midnight eyes. "There will be Alpha and Luna, ruling as equals, as it was in the beginning." As if the forest watched through the high windows, rain began to fall outside, the soft patter against the glass the only sound in the stunned silence that followed. "You can't simply change centuries of tradition," Lady Callista protested, finding her voice at last. "The Alpha King has always ruled alone." The bloodline continues," Kalen interrupted. "Strengthened by Veil blood, not weakened by it." From there, he addressed the border alphas who had remained silent throughout the ceremony. "You 12 were summoned to witness and to choose. Do you accept this new leadership?" This returned to the old ways of balanced rule. The eldest among them, a grizzled wolf with scars crossing his weathered face, stepped forward. "The borders recognize the true bond," he said simply. "We serve the Alpha and Luna as one." With his scent in the air now mingled with her own in a way that made her wolf purr with satisfaction, Aria watched as understanding spread through the assembled nobles. The border alphas controlled the territories, the armies. Their allegiance decided everything. Without warning, Princess Maya stepped onto the dais, producing a second crown, smaller than Kalen's, but crafted of the same ancient silver. "This belonged to the first Luna," she explained, holding it out to Aria. "It has waited centuries for the one who would restore balance." While her pulse raced with nervous energy, Aria accepted the delicate circlet. It felt impossibly light in her hands, yet weighted with centuries of history, of expectations. As if pulled by a string, she found herself turning to face the nobles directly. "I was nothing to you," she said, her voice clear and steady. "A servant. A shadow. You looked through me for 20 years, never seeing who I truly was." The air thickened with tension as she continued. "You are right about one thing. I don't belong in your world. Your world of rigid hierarchies, of alphas dominating omegas, of bloodlines determining worth." With every step he took around her, positioning himself at her side rather than above her, Kalen reinforced her words. "So we will build a different world," he declared. "One where strength comes from balance, not dominance." In the echo of his voice, silence fell once more across the great hall. Then, one by one, the nobles began to kneel, first the border alphas, then those allied with them, then reluctantly, the members of the Lunar Council. Finally, only Varek and a handful of others remained standing, defiance written across their features. "You would destroy everything for her?" Varek demanded, disgust evident in his voice. Her name hung in the air as Kalen's smile turned predatory. "Not destroy," he corrected. "Transform." As shadows danced between the kneeling nobles, Aria felt a strange peace settling into her bones. This was right. This was what had been missing for generations: balance between alpha strength and omega wisdom, between power and compassion. With a single nod from Kalen, the royal guards moved to surround Varek and the remaining dissenters. You may join us in the new world we're building, Kaelin offered, or you may leave the 12 packs. But the old ways end tonight. Between one breath and the next, Aria placed the Luna's crown upon her head. The moment the silver touched her brow, a surge of ancient magic swept through the hall, windows rattling, candles flaring brighter, the very stones of the palace seeming to sigh in recognition. You were never beneath me, Kaelin said, his voice soft enough that only she could hear as he took her hand once more. You were just waiting to be seen. As the bond pulsed between them, stronger than ever before, Aria gazed out at the kingdom that was now partially hers to guide. Not as servant elevated beyond her station, not as political pawn or strategic alliance, but as Luna, equal partner to the alpha she had chosen, and who had chosen her in return. The mark tingled on her neck, matched now by the one she'd placed on Kaelin. 2 wolves, 2 bloodlines, 2 traditions merging into something new and powerful and right. Her soul answered his as they faced their future together, a future neither could have imagined when a servant girl had tripped at an alpha king's feet, changing both their worlds forever.